All right, guys. We've had a few more turn up now, and I've just had a question come up in the Q&A from Shirley asking how I'm feeling, which was very nice of you, Shirley. I'm on the mend, thank you. Hopefully my voice holds up while I have a chance to talk to everyone today. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. The webinar format gives us a great opportunity to get information out to a much broader audience than the traditional methods that we've used for programs like this in the past. I hope you find this session informative. We have Russell Mogilevsky to present to us on EMDG, old and new. As always with our presentations, the information that's been put together is general commentary. It shouldn't be relied on as advice. So just a quick disclaimer on that level. The last 2 years have been pretty interesting for those of us who work on the Export Market Development Grant. We saw claims for FY19 suddenly paid out in full when the payout rate for second tranche payments had fallen below 30% in prior years. We saw the export performance test waived for FY20 claims and an increase in the cap for first tranche payments to $100,000. Of course, we later found out that there would be no second tranche payment, but that's what you get, I suppose. All the while, there's been a new regime being put together in response to what was a much publicised review of the program. We heard with much fanfare about a new upfront application process and a simpler system for applicants. Well, now we've seen the reality of all that with guidelines released and application deadlines for FY22 claims announced. Of course, at the same time, claims for FY21 continue under the old rules, hence the title of the webinar today, EMDG Old and New. So we're going to take the opportunity today to provide you with an overview of the key changes, what they're going to mean to you. More importantly, though, we're here to answer your questions as you have them on the way through. With that in mind, please use the Q&A function to send your questions through. We'll address as many of them as we're able to once Russell's finished his presentation. We have left plenty of time on our agenda to answer questions. Please don't be afraid to send them through. If you have any questions at all, the Q&A is the place to put them. Now, though, I'm going to pass over to Russell Mogilevsky, who is going to take you through EMDG, old and new.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you for being here, and glad you're feeling much better today. Today's program, we will go through the changes to the program, to the Export Market Development Grant Program, and I noticed some of the participants here today have applied for the grant previously, so you would be interested to know what would be the transition from the old program to the new program, which I call the new normal. And for those who have not applied, it's a fresh start to learn about the new rules and the application process, when to apply, what can be claimed, and the type of documentation that's required. As David mentioned, feel free to send in your questions. We have left time for question and answer during today's presentation. Just move on to the next slide, please. So the old and the new, what stays the same? What are the differences? For those who have not previously claimed EMDG or who have claimed and need a refresher, the old program, which is going to finish up this financial year, is a reimbursement model. That is, you needed to spend the money first and then apply. The eligibility was that the turnover for the organization claiming was to be under $50 million, and the minimum spend on eligible promotional activities was $15,000 per application, less $5,000 initial expenditure. The other aspect of it is that maximum you would have, or claimant would have received, was $150,000 per claim, and it was limited to 8 claims over a life of the business. Under the new program, the 8-year or 8 applications limit still stands, but the difference is as follows. It's a grant application model, that is, you need to apply first and then you spend the money and then you get the reimbursement. For another eligibility point is that the turnover has been reduced. That is, it's now only valid for organizations with $20 million turnover or less. And the types of grants that will be paid is based on a 3-tier system. For tier 1, it's a $40,000 tier payment maximum. Tier 2 is $80,000, and tier 3 is $150,000. The other thing is that there is no cap, so there's no $15,000 threshold limit. So if you only spend $10,000 or $20,000 on eligible promotional activities, you will be entitled to receive $10,000 back. I will go. Thank you, David. I will go through each of those tiers in more detail. This will apply from 1st of July. For those who are first-time exporters, that is, you have not exported before, you will be entitled to apply for tier 1, and you will be able to apply for 2 years. The maximum you will be receiving is $40,000 per financial year, meaning that if you are going to spend $80,000 on export promotional expenses, you will be eligible to apply for $40,000. And the maximum is a 2-year period. For those organizations that are expanding their exports, that is, they may have claimed in the past, or they have been exporting in the past but have not claimed, they will be entitled to a tier 2 program, that is an expanding exporter, and they will be entitled to receive up to $80,000 per financial year. Now, those who have been exporting but are making a strategic shift and are expanding the promotional activities will be entitled to a tier 3 program, which entitles to a maximum of $150,000 per financial year. What I might do is explain firstly the types of promotional activities and expenses that can be claimed, and then we'll go into a bit more about how to qualify for each of the tiers and what it actually means for the business. Okay, so first of all, the application timeline, so the transition, the old and the new. Blue is old, red is new. So from 1st of July, so in 8 days' time, the applications for the old program will open, and that will cover this financial year 2021. For those organizations or exporters who have not claimed before, you will be able to lodge the application for this financial year as well as the one prior, which is 2020, as a combined claim. That's only valid for first-time claimants. And that covers the eligible promotional expenses that were incurred during those 2 years. From the 16th of August, if you're planning to spend more money on export promotional expenses or marketing expenses, you will then be able to apply for the new program. If you are applying for both, that means there might be an overlap in terms of your applications. You will be applying for the previous year, and you will also be applying for the following year. 30th of November, 2 deadlines. The first one is a deadline for the old program, where you need to submit all of your expenses that you've incurred, all of your costs, and pretty much lodge the application for that financial year. As well as that's a deadline for those applications that are for the new program. The program deadlines, they are flexible. So for this new program, because of the overlap and the introduction, we've been given a bit of a longer period to apply, but we've been advised that in subsequent years, applications will probably have an earlier opening date and a much shorter turnaround date, but that will change from year to year based on the EMDG guidelines that are going to be released each year. So that's 30th of November. And then we have also another deadline, which is the 28th of February, and that's for the old program for applicants who are using QAP consultants or Austrade approved consultants, and they can lodge the applications later by the 28th of February. These are the main big deadlines to be aware of. So 1st of July, 16th of August. Now, next slide, I'm being rushed here, which is thank you. We are going to cover what expenses can be claimed, and I know that some attendees here have not claimed in the past, so I will go through that thoroughly because this will be relevant for the previous financial year. It will also be relevant for the new program. For the old program, each of those categories listed on the screen in front of you have a limit. So for example, overseas representation, that is your marketing representative overseas, you can only claim up to $200,000. However, under the new program, there is no cap. You can choose how you allocate your marketing spend. Same goes for marketing consultants and so forth. With marketing visits, there are two types of marketing visits that are allowed under the new program. There is the marketing visit overseas, that is you're traveling overseas to meet potential customers, and you can claim up to 21 days of that travel, including flights. Under the old program, you claim the cost of the flights, and there is a daily allowance allocated for that travel, if that is you are able to travel overseas. That is $350 daily allowance per person traveling. Under the new program, the daily allowance is no longer relevant. All you need to do is provide the invoices for accommodation, your flights, your food, Ubers, out-of-pocket expenses, and that will be part of the claim. So those who are staying in high-end expensive hotels will obviously be able to claim more, and those who might be staying at less expensive places because of location or staying with relatives may not be able to capture as much of those costs. So overseas representation, marketing consultants can be claimed, marketing visits. There's also a new provision under the new program, marketing visits around Australia. So if it happens to be that there's a delegation coming, let's say from Singapore, and they're going to North Queensland, and you're traveling from Melbourne, you can travel to North Queensland, meet the delegation from Singapore to promote your products or services, then the cost of that trip will be also part of the grant application. Free samples have generally been for goods. They have not been for services in the past. Under the existing rules and under the new rules and guidelines, it talks about eligible products. It doesn't necessarily limit it to goods, but there hasn't been any elaboration in terms of how would you value your services. We might need to get more guidance for that if it's relevant for your organization. And the benefit here for the new program, and the main benefit, is that if you apply upfront, you will receive feedback very quickly in terms of what types of costs can be claimable and which are excluded if they don't meet the criteria. You can do trade fairs, seminars, you can do digital advertising or physical advertising. You can also claim the cost of bringing, if possible, overseas buyers to Australia and paying for their flights and accommodation. Registering intellectual property such as trademarks and patents is also claimable. Under the new program, there's also an additional opportunity to claim sales training or marketing training to enter international markets. This is only relevant for Tier 1 applicants, or applicants who qualify for Tier 1. It's to get them up to speed with being able to enter international markets. It's also relevant for another category that we haven't really discussed, and it's probably not relevant for the attendees, and they're representative bodies who can only claim maximum of 3 years, and they're the ones who do work on behalf of exporters. So if you are a representative body or have further questions, we can discuss that separately. We can move on to the next slide. And please ask, if you have any specific questions about any of those expense categories and how that would apply to your business, please send your questions. Now, the new process, let's go through the new process. This is how it's going to work, and I'll give you a high-level description here. So step number 1 is that Austrade will publish guidelines, and the current guidelines are in draft format, and they will be released on the 1st of July. The second step is for businesses to submit an online grant application, which will open from, as I mentioned, from 15th or 16th of August and close on the 30th of November. Austrade will then assess the application, and they will be providing guideline in terms of the turnaround. It might take them 2 or 3 months to actually get back with responses. Number 4, grant agreement is offered with terms and funding amount, and that's a really important criteria here, is that you might be applying for tier 3 $150,000 grant, but let's say the program is oversubscribed at 0.2, so that means there's more money being asked and has been allocated in the budget. You may not be able to qualify for the full amount. So that's why there is a particular time frame allocated. So then Austrade can assess what is the interest and estimated expenditure, and then allocate the funds or portion the funds across all applicants. Once you then, step number 5, you actually do the promotional work that is been agreed on. Step number 6, this is where an annual submission is done, which is called a milestone report, with all the supporting documents, and we'll go through the supporting documents in a second, and Austrade will then make a milestone payment. That's essentially what is of interest to businesses. Step number 7 is Austrade will review the program and work out what will happen in the future rounds, and how, if any new guidelines or amended guidelines are required to incorporate anything that happened during the year. Let's skip to the next slide, please. So 2 things. So for businesses, step number 2 and step number 6 are the crucial ones. Step number 2 is the grant application and what documents are required to be submitted at that level. First of all, you need to provide your financial statement. Drafts are okay, so you can draw them up from your Xero, MYOB, or Excel, however you keep your records, to demonstrate that your turnover at the time you're applying is less than $20 million. The second step is to, or the second part is to demonstrate that if you have not exported before, that you are ready for export. So you might have to do some sort of training that is provided by Austrade or by a representative body, or you may do something on your own and make a declaration that you have undertook the training. The other evidence, if you're going for tier 2 and tier 3, then you need to establish eligibility of your product and whether you are qualifying for tier 2 or tier 3. And this is where the plan to market documentation will come into. Now, step number 6, milestone reports. What is a milestone report? It's basically a report of your expenditure that is in line with your funding agreement and evidence of spending. That is invoices, your bank statements that you have actually paid for those expenses. And there might be a requirement that you demonstrate that the work that you're saying that was done was actually done. So as an example, if you're applying for your marketing visit, you will demonstrate that you have actually gone and saw potential customers. If you are applying for digital advertising, then you will demonstrate that you have actually carried out the digital marketing campaign. Or if you're applying, making changes on your website to target consumers in foreign markets, then you demonstrate that you have actually done that. It's fairly straightforward, but under the old program, many of the applications and submissions have been rejected because of lack of evidence. So we'll need to be mindful in the grant application and in the agreement what requirements are needed to be fulfilled.
Russell, if I may say something. So step 6, it's really very similar to the claim we submit today. When we gather all the evidence and put it into schedules and manage the claim. So, and it will probably, as far as we understand, it's going to be done in the same way. We are not aware of opening and closing dates of submitting step 6. It's actually not in the regulation at the moment. Step 2 to 4, probably in future years, will be done before the beginning of the financial year. This year, it's happening a bit in delay. It doesn't mean that if you start spending money from the 1st of July, it's not going to be acknowledged. You're obviously going to put it into the plan, and if it will get approved, you'll be able to claim those expenses. So you don't have to hold back on expenses from the 1st of July until you get the approval of stage 4 this year.
Okay, thank you, Boaz. Thank you for clarifying that. And we certainly, and from the advice we've been given or guidance we've been given from Austrade, is that they are going to be reviewing the program and making it a lot more attractive and flexible for applicants down the track. Thank you. I might need to jump onto the next slide. Okay, so one of the biggest misconceptions in terms of plan to market and what type of documentation is required to come with the initial submission is that do you need a 20-30 page business plan and a marketing plan? That's not in the guidelines, and it's certainly not something that has been communicated by Austrade as a requirement. A simple one-page statement in terms of what you're trying to do, what is your product, what are your goals, how will you measure success, what is your budget, and what marketing activities are you going to undertake at a high level will be sufficient. You don't need to go into the specific detail. As an example, on 5th of August, we will put out a Facebook ad, and in November, we will travel to the US and we will attend a trade show, and then we will send so many samples to those customers. It doesn't have to be the detailed, as long as you will demonstrate that you're trying, your customers, let's say, are in the US, and you're going to be carrying out online social media advertising, and you might be registering, and you will be registering trademarks, and you will be sending samples, and you're also going to be engaging services of a marketing consultant, or you will have an overseas representative on the ground in the US, and your total for the year is going to be whatever the total budget is going to be. That will be sufficient. One thing to note is that if you are understating how much you will be spending, let's say you estimating that you will be spending $50,000 per financial year, you will be entitled to $25,000, but let's say you spend $80,000, which would make you probably eligible for 40, you will not be able to receive 40. In the agreement, it will say that you are entitled to 25. So it's really important to be mindful of the budget, realistic budget, and to cover any contingencies. If you haven't spent enough, let's say if you're a first-time claimant and you're applying for an $80,000 budget that is $40,000 grant, you've only spent 60, you will receive 30, you will not receive 40. we could jump on to the next slide. Now, this is an interesting one. This is, how do you qualify for tier 2? How do you qualify for tier 3? Tier 2 is for those businesses who have already been exporting and they're continuing expanding their marketing activities in a given market. So let's say if you have been exporting to the US for the last few years and you're exporting educational services and you're continuing to export educational services to the US, you would qualify for tier 2. However, if you're making a strategic shift, let's say you strategic shift is from the guidelines is that you're targeting a new market. So it could be you're moving to an Asian market, moving to Singapore, let's say, and that's a strategic shift, you will qualify under tier 3. Or let's say if you were in the US, and let's stick with educational services, and you were promoting tertiary education, and now your business is going into secondary education, that would be a strategic shift. Or if you were on the west coast of the US and you decided to target the east coast of the US under the existing guidelines that have been given, that would be a strategic shift as well. Another example in the guidelines is that if you've been heavy on travel, in-person presentations, doing trade shows, and that's been your marketing spend, and now you are looking at e-commerce, digital marketing, and you've never really done any digital marketing, that could be regarded as a strategic shift. So that's the program overview, is that you need to make an application, explain your marketing plan, and then identify whether you fall into tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, identify your proposed marketing activities, identify your budget, spend the money, and then when it comes to milestone reports, that's when you will receive the grant amount. That's the overview. We have been receiving questions before this webinar, and there's some questions that are coming through now. I might pass on to David to take control of the Q&A, and myself and Boaz is also available online to answer any of those questions.
Thanks, Russell. We've got a few questions that have come through, and please continue to ask any if you have them on the way through. Mina has just asked if it's possible for us to share the webinar. She wasn't able to join us from the beginning. Yes, we will make the information available online once the session is all finished, Mina, so you won't have missed out. Question, Russell, is it detrimental to an applicant to apply for as much funding as possible, i.e. overstating their expenses, and then incur significantly less eligible expenditure to report in milestone reporting?
I'm going to put my Australian, I'm not an Australian person, but the Australian would be, let's refer to the EMDG rules and the EMDG guidelines. EMDG guidelines don't state that you're not allowed to overstate your expenses, but they obviously would need to be reasonable with your expectations. So if you think that you will be spending certain amount on the activities, on certain activities, but you've spent less, I don't think you will be disadvantaged. However, what I might do is answer the question differently, Mike, is to say that, let's say if you put in that you were going to be spending money on free samples, let's say, and digital advertising, and they did not happen, but you decided to attend some trade shows, and then you had to register trademarks and patents, and they weren't in the initial application and in the subsequent agreement, then you will be prevented from claiming those. That's what the guidelines talk about. Or on the other hand, if you are saying that you are making a strategic shift and targeting, you're going to be under tier 3, you're targeting a new market, let's say, and you have not targeted the new market, then you may not be able to claim costs associated with whatever promotional activities you took place. It's important to ensure that your application captures all of your realistic expenditures and activities. And if you're going to be budgeting, then you might over budget rather than under budget.
Okay, thanks, Russell. Another question, what happens if you continue to expand your existing market for more than the 3 years allowed under tier 2? Can you continue to claim under the tier 2 to get your full 8 claims in, or are you no longer eligible to claim EMDG?
Okay. So there's tier 1 for those who have not exported before, and then the tier 2 who have exported and continuing exporting in the same way as before. And then there is tier 3 for those who are continuing to export and are doing something different. And then for tier 1, you claim twice or 2 years. Tier 2, you claim 3 years, and tier 3, you claim another 3 years. In the guidelines, it doesn't say that once you've claimed tier 2 for 3 years, you are prevented from claiming tier 2 for another 3 years. All you need to do is apply for tier 2 the first time, and that agreement will be valid for 3 years, so you don't need to reapply every year. You just need to provide milestone payments on each year. Then once that 3-year agreement finishes, then you can apply for another 3-year agreement, and then you will decide whether you wish to apply for tier 2 again, or you wish to apply for tier 3. Obviously, you can't apply for tier 2 once you've applied for either tier 2 or 3 because you're not new to export. But what you may do is to then say, I've got another 2 years because you can claim up to 8 times, and I've only claimed 6. I can claim another 2 years of either tier, probably under tier 2, because then there's a budget of what you can claim in total. It's not clear in the guidelines, but that's what consultations with Austrade told us, basically.
Okay, thank you. Will there be any export earning test in play?
Thank you, Mike. Export earnings, there is no export earnings test per se. So under the old program, once you have participated in the program twice, Austrade wants to see your export earnings, and your grant payable will be limited by your earnings, and there's a percentage limit. That is no longer the case under the new program, but under the new program, you will need to demonstrate that you are exporting once you claim for tier 2 or tier 3. So it could be that you have claimed for tier 1, you were new to export, you might have been somewhat successful, but then you stopped exporting, you might not be able to continue claiming. Well, that will happen after tier 2. There might be a period of time when you are prevented from claiming, but as long as you're exporting, and it doesn't say how much you need to export, as long as there is some sort of activity, you will be able to participate in the program.
Yep. Okay. Russell, question from Shirley. If we are making a strategic shift and our planned project expenditure is 300,000, will they get the maximum of 150,000?
If you qualify, so the assumption is you qualify for tier 3. If you qualify for tier 3, then you can have a budget of $300,000 and above, and you will be maximum you will get is 150,000 per financial year. But that is contingent on the budget, overall budget, Austrade budget, having that funds. If the program is oversubscribed, then you may not be able to get the full amount, and you will know that at the time when your application is reviewed and an agreement is given to you for sign-off. So you'll know before you start spending whether there's going to be enough funds for that.
Okay, that answers that.
But I think, but just going
sorry,
back
go
on that, sorry, just trying to understand, but that's only assuming that you qualify for tier 3. So we'll need to have a further discussion whether that particular organization qualifies for tier 3.
Okay. So if they qualify for tier 3 and we're confident in all of that, then okay, that makes sense. Vikas is asking, he has claimed EMDG in 2019 and 2020, but not in 2021 because there was a lot of product development happening as part of the strategic shift. 2022 will see a lot of spending on marketing. Will the fact that there's this gap in FY21 with no spending, will that have an impact on their ability to claim?
Well, it will have on the ability to claim in 21. If there's no spend, there won't be a claim for 21. In terms of claim for 22, what will happen is that this is where the decision you will need to make whether you want to claim in the following years. So if you've got the grant in 19 and 20, means you're not new to export, which means you may qualify for either tier 2 or tier 3. You will need to demonstrate that you are exporting, and then you will need to demonstrate whether you're qualifying for tier 2 or for tier 3.
Yeah, that sounds good. With tier 2 and tier 3, who makes the decision on whether a claimant or an applicant is applying for tier 2 or tier 3? Is that made by the applicant or is it made by Australia?
The applicant would be submitting the application, and they would be submitting the application with supporting documents, plan to market, which would indicate that they're submitting either for tier 2 or tier 3. But ultimately, the decision is made by Austrade on review of the application.
Okay. Russell, Mike's asked if there are any advantages to being a QIP consultant under the new regime.
In the draft guidelines that have been received, there is a reference to consultants, grants consultants, submitting applications on behalf of applicants or the initial applications, and then also submitting the milestone reports. It doesn't necessarily have anything specific to QIP consultants. And that might change down the track. We don't have that information at the moment.
Okay.
We're guessing, but we don't have anything specific.
Yeah. Okay. And Nina's got quite a specific question. If we have a new Australian entity with no historical transactions initially created to start exporting, would it be eligible for export market development?
No, let me just make sure I answer so the entity has been set up, and the entity is has an eligible product, so it could be something that they've developed and they're starting promoting it, but they haven't made any sales. If those expenses were incurred in this financial year or last financial year, then they would qualify under the old program. If they haven't got any sales yet and are about to undertake promotional activities, that is from July onwards, that they would qualify for the new program under tier 1.
The emphasis on that the company must be export ready. So they have a valid product or services that is ready to be exported straight away.
Yeah. So as long as there's an eligible product and you qualify for tier 1, that you'll be able to play.
Okay. We've got Russell, there's a long application window for the FY22 claims. Is there any indication about how long that application window is likely to be in the future once people understand what the application process is?
Yeah, Bo has mentioned that at the beginning, in that each year that will change, and it's more or less likely to be prior to the end of the financial year. So it could be running from, for a 6-week period in June, in time for July activity to take place. So it could be May, June. And so 6 weeks is what's been flagged previously.
The payments is a question that's coming up a little bit here. When can the applicant expect to actually receive the funds through this process?
Yeah, once the milestone report has been submitted and reviewed, then that's when the payment is expected to be paid. And again, that particular date has not been announced yet, but it is going to be done annually. But that period has not been yet announced.
So we can assume it will be very similar to the current program.
Yeah, so for FY22 financial year 22, finishes on the 30th of June 2022, then you'd be expected to submit your milestone report shortly after, and once it's processed, the payment will be made, and probably timeframes, turnaround times are fairly similar to the existing programs, but yeah, it's not as specific as the old program. There's more discretion given to Austrade when that will happen.
Okay. Nina's asked the question, what will happen for an Australian company that's already spent all of their expenses and started exporting before the new rules come into play? I think you may have answered it before, but just that in that situation, if it's expenses that have been incurred before 1 July 2021, then that's something that will be claimed under the previous regime, is that right?
That's right. You can combine two years, FY20 and FY21, and as long as you've got an eligible product and you've carried out the promotional activities overseas and spent at least $15,000, then you would most likely qualify under the old program.
Russell, the appropriate strategic shift that's mentioned and required for Tier 3, who determines what is an appropriate strategic shift?
Well, it has to be in line with the business's objectives. So if the business objective is to enter a new market that they haven't pursued in the past, that would be a strategic shift. Or if they've come up with a new product, that would be a strategic shift. If they are looking at a different way of promoting to the existing market or with the existing product, that is also regarded as a strategic shift. So it's the company who decides what their marketing is going to be, but it's Austrade who determines whether the rules are satisfied in terms of being able to be within Tier 3.
And is there an ability to appeal any decision made in that regard?
Yeah, there is a appeal process. It's in line with, I think, with all rules as well. There's an internal appeal process directly with Austrade, so an independent person, officer of Austrade, will review the application and make a finding or determination whether the original assessment was correct or a different assessment is to be made. And then if businesses are not satisfied with that decision, then that can be taken further, and that can go all the way to the AET Administrative Appeal Tribunal, and then it can be appealed to the federal court as well.
Okay. And Russell, just confirming it's still effectively 50% of the eligible expenditure that the grant is covering? So it's dollar for dollar?
Yeah, it's dollar for dollar. So if if $300,000 was spent on the tier 3, then $150,000 would be eligible to be claimed back.
This is the maximum, yeah.
And that's the maximum. That's right. And there's no $5,000 initial deduction under the previous rules.
Excellent.
That's the maximum before all the funds been allocated, and probably we never saw anyone really get, I think, the full amount. So
I don't think we've ever. Well, we have in FY19. We have as in FY19 everything was paid, but people had to get paid if they spent over $300,000.
Yeah.
No, I think we did. No, we didn't. No, that's all good. I thought we missed the slide, but we didn't miss the slide. All good.
Yeah, it's okay. I have another question from mine. It's a question around the representative bodies, Russell. So, do you have a definition of what types of businesses would be classified as a representative body?
Yeah, representative body is not regarded as a business itself. So it's an organization that doesn't do the exporting on its own behalf. It could be an industry association that is promoting other businesses, products and services who are members of that organization. So I can't like, for example, I've got one, the Meat and Livestock Association, for example, would then be promoting their members' businesses, their products, and they would then incur some of the cost on behalf of the members, and they would be entitled to claim under the tier 3 times.
Sorry, Russell, under the current regime, the first time you claim, you're able to claim 2 years at the same time. Is that something that's still going to be able to be done under the new regime?
Yeah, under the old regime, it's a retrospective program. So you would have done the work, you would have spent the money, gone overseas, gone for the trips, gone on the trips, spent money on advertising, and then you would look back in the 2 financial years. You would then say, well, how much did I spend? And then in the first year, that might have been $7,000, and in the second year it was $10,000 because you only knew. So Austrade had those rules to say, well, you can combine those 2 years as one claim, then you would add it up to 17 and put the submission in, put the application in. Under the current rules, I haven't seen anywhere that will say that you can combine 2 years, except for, obviously for tier 1, which is a 2-year maximum program. So if you're new to export, you've got, you haven't really been exporting, but you're setting yourself up for it. You've got 2 years to put that application in as tier 1 company business. So that's as far as a 2-year rule that I've seen, but I haven't seen any other references.
Okay, thank you for that. Russell, a new startup, don't have any overseas trading experience, haven't exported internationally before. You mentioned that there was training that's available to them and they need to be able to show that they're export ready. What does that entail?
There are 2 ways. One is, so it's a startup, they go to the representative body and they are getting training on how to set themselves up for export, and it's run through the overseas, through that representative body. How that looks like, I don't know, I haven't seen the training yet, but I'm sure different associations are coming up with different training materials for that. Which is in line with the Austrade requirements. The other way is for startups to hop onto the Austrade website, and there's an online training module which is opening up soon. So I haven't seen that one either. It's a work in progress. And once you go through that in your own time, you then, as a startup, make a declaration and include the declaration with your initial tier 1 application to say that you've gone through that training.
Okay.
That's what the guidelines say.
Yep.
And there's a lot of work that is going into it right now as we speak, because the guidelines have just been released.
Okay. Russell, in terms of information becoming available, the application form itself, has there been any indication from Austrade or anyone when that will be published and be available, or is it available already?
Yeah, it's not available yet. The guidelines that have been published are going to dictate what the application form is going to look like, and the guidelines are currently in their draft format and are to be formally released, or expected to be formally released on the 1st of July, and that's when the application will be made available, but it will not be able to be submitted until the 16th of August.
Okay. So a little while to prepare when
there is a bit of time to prepare, and I think it's a good opportunity now for many businesses to reflect on what they have been doing in the last few years, the new normal, what is happening in the world right now, where they're standing with their existing customers, what are the opportunities with new markets, and then come up with the most amazing marketing plan possible, but a realistic one, and then use that as the basis for the EMDG application, and then they will get the approval reasonably quickly, and they will be able to plan for the next 2 or 3 years ahead in terms of the spend, and know that the money that they're spending has already been authorized, and all they need to do is just prove that they've spent the money appropriately. So it's a bit of a certainty there from Austrade under the new program.
Okay, that's good. Russell, Anina's just asked us some confirmation regarding the combination of 2 years and not being able to do that for tier 2 and 3. That's correct.
So for well, I don't think you can combine it for tier 1 either.
Yeah.
But it's more that so just to reiterate, the application process is to be able for Austrade to give approval for the business and Austrade to enter into a grant agreement for a maximum of 2 years for tier 1, maximum of 3 years for tier 2, and maximum of 3 years for tier 3 again. Once that 3-year period lapses, the business will need to apply again, and that would be for another 3-year period, and then they would decide whether they want to stay with tier 2 if they were in tier 2, or whether they're making a strategic shift and applying for tier 3.
Excellent. Another question from Nina, just regarding the sales training provided by Austrade. If a company or an entity is already exporting, is there a need for them to demonstrate that they are export ready by attending or going through this training?
Yeah, so the training requirement is only a requirement for tier 1 applicants, so applicants who are qualifying as tier 1 businesses, which means that they have not exported before. And so Austrade wants to see that they're ready to export. If the business has been exporting in the past, then they may not qualify for under tier 1. They would probably qualify either under tier 2 or tier 3, and they do not require to demonstrate the training requirements.
Okay. I think we've worked through all of the questions that have come through. Russell, Boaz, thank you very much for your input.
I think there's one more question that came through.
There you're right, there is. Is it possible to swap from a tier 2 to tier 3 partway through the contract?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's something that I did not really address during the presentation or subsequently. And this is to do with the agreements. If you have an agreement with a grant agreement with Austrade, it's fixed for that period of time. There is in the guidelines, in the rules and the guidelines, there is a provision to amend that agreement, and then that's where you may say, well, we're making a strategic shift. This is no longer relevant, but the rules themselves, the guidelines, don't specify whether it is possible to do that specifically, but I think it might be possible. I don't have that answer because it's not black and white in the guidelines. But I think it might be possible to amend the agreement. The issue comes up is that the funds are allocated to you, and there's a bit of going on between the budget. So it's something that we might need to go back to Austrade and get them clarified and actually put into the final guidelines, because it's not clear in the draft guidelines.
Yeah. So that question came through from George, and I'll just send a direct response to George at the moment, and we will let you know what we are able to on that, but also to everyone else. As we get closer to the new regime taking over, we'll obviously update our information that's available to all our applicants, and work through that as we need to. Okay. Excellent. Again, Russell, Boaz, thank you for your help for answering the questions and for the information today. To those who have attended, thank you very much. It's been great to have some questions coming through. If you have any more questions, please shoot us an email, info@savingpoint.com.au. As I said earlier, we will be making the information available to everyone who's attended today. We'll move on from there. But thank you very much for attending, and good luck with your EMDG claims in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.